Welcome, Gunrunner.
Over the years that I've been running the Amazing Exclusives series, I've long considered doing a video on the Sinclair ZX81 or the Timex Sinclair 1000 if you're in North America, but wasn't quite sure if it would make a compelling watch. After all, this is a computer that only came with 1K of memory as standard, crude black and white character-based graphics, an unresponsive membrane keyboard, minimal expansion options, and no sound of any kind at all. But once I started investigating the machine, I was really surprised at just what it could do. It's hard to think of another system that was pushed to its very limits as much as the ZX81, especially once you shoved a 16K RAM pack in the back of it, which all of the following games will need. I think a big reason for this is that the ZX81 sold extremely well, not just in the UK where it was created, but also in other parts of Europe and even North America, where it was marketed by Timex instead, as I briefly mentioned at the start. In fact, it remains the only British micro to gain any kind of real traction across the pond, and that was mostly down to its extremely low price, giving regular people the chance to experience a home computer for the very first time. In fact, many famous devs have cited the ZX81 as the system that set them on the path to stardom. But this isn't an amazing facts video. I'm sure the ZX81 will get that treatment at some point. This one is all about the games. So let's get going with some gameplay as we take a closer look at 10 amazing Sinclair ZX81 exclusives.
Now, Timex brings the power of the computer within reach of more people than ever before. Introducing the Timex Sinclair 1000, the first of a new generation of computers designed to be easier to use and to own. For $99.95, power to learn at the speed of light, power to organize with unfailing accuracy. The Timex Sinclair 1000, the power is within your reach.
I have to start with this one because it just surprised me so much, in several different ways too. Firstly, because I was stunned to learn that a ZX81 game of this quality was a type-in basic listing from a magazine. I can only assume this is because the market for ZX81 games was pretty much dead by 1985, so the authors sent it to your computer instead. Secondly, because, as I just mentioned, this game is excellent, and lastly because it's just so unique and also pretty advanced for what it is too. You see, Pinbat is exactly what it says it is, pinball with a bat. They basically took Video Pinball and Breakout for the Atari 2600 and smashed them together into one game. So you have to deflect the ball around the screen to achieve as much score as possible and move on to the next one. Yes, you heard that right, this game has multiple screens, 5 in fact, which is pretty amazing in all honesty, especially as the games it was clearly inspired by only featured 1. Although the graphics are text-based, they actually work really well, and the controls are fast and responsive too. There really isn't another game like Pinbat for the Sinclair ZX81, so make sure you give it a play. I think anyone with any knowledge of the ZX81 and its extensive games library would have predicted that I was going to include some software farm titles on this list, because they are not only up there amongst the computer's very best, but are also notable for their use of high resolution graphics. These are achieved by using some rather special hardware tricks to change the fixed character set into user-defined graphics, much like you can do on the Spectrum as standard. And yes, as you can see, the results are pretty astounding. The game sounds a bit like it's going to be a rip-off of Jetpack, but while it does have some similarities, it's actually pretty original for the most part. The idea is to guide the titular hero around the platforms trying to grab some fuel for your jetpack. You do this by climbing ladders and jumping across platforms whilst avoiding the bubble, which will trap you and drop you in the water. Once you have some fuel, you can fly across the sea to grab a diamond and then head back to replenish your fuel once again. You can see just how much you have left from the gauge at the bottom right on the screen, with your lives on the bottom left. Rocket Man is both challenging and enjoyable, a good mix. This game, which was published by Timex in the USA, is often compared to the popular Atari 2600 game Yar's Revenge, even if it does sound a bit more like a Zaxxon clone. I can certainly see why, but in all honesty, it reminded me more of the final boss level from Gorf, and once I explain, you will understand why. Now it certainly looks quite a bit like Yar's Revenge, with your ship on the left shooting towards a shielded alien on the right, with a set of cannons shooting back. You have to break through the 3 rotating walls and destroy the titular Zorlac in order to win the game, and you have 5 lives to try and do this. There are 5 levels in total, ranging from slow to suicidal, and you can choose which one you want to attempt before the game starts. The main change is the speed of Zorlac and his shields, because not only do these rotate, but his ship also moves towards you incrementally, making it harder and harder to avoid the cannon fire. Incidentally, these cannons can't be destroyed, so you can only get out their way. It's the way you have to break through those shields of the ship to hit the pilot that reminded me of Gorf, as well as the way it shoots back. Fortress of Zorlac is good simple fun. Romic were one of several software houses, along with the likes of Arctic Computing, Quicksilver and Houston, to make their name on the ZX81 before moving on to bigger and better things with its far more powerful successor, the ZX Spectrum. One of their best titles for the computer, Bank Robber, is loosely based on Commodore's own VIC-20 game Money Wars, sharing many common gameplay characteristics. The idea of the game, as the title very much suggests, is to rob as much money from the bank on the left hand side of the screen as possible and return it to your house on the right. You can only grab one bag of loot at a time, so you'll need to make repeated trips, and this isn't as easy as it first sounds, for several reasons. Firstly, the bank isn't always open, so you can only rob it where the door swings out. For some strange reason, the same is also true of your house. I mean, don't you have a key? What is even more bizarre is that you seem to be committing this crime in the middle of a meteor storm, and if one of these hits you, then you lose one of your 3 lives. Grab a brick as it falls, however, and you can build Space Invaders like shields to help you out. There are also several difficulty settings you can choose from if you find all of this too easy. So let's get stealing. And now it's time for another high resolution game, but one that isn't by Software Farm, because this one was created by somebody called Stephen McDonald, but was never commercially released sadly, along with its sequel Dan's Revenge, because by the time they were finished, the ZX81 market had almost completely evaporated as everyone had moved onto the Spectrum. I suppose you could describe Rock Crush as a Boulder Dash clone, but I actually think that that's a bit unfair, because it plays quite differently in a number of very important ways. Firstly, the levels in Rock Crush don't scroll, each one fits on a single screen. Secondly, there is the much more focused puzzle aspect, as there really is only one way to complete each level, and you have to get your movements perfect. And then there is the way you move, because in Rock Crush you cannot push the boulders and have to get out their way very quickly when they fall. But speaking of falling, they only do this if there is a space underneath them. No falling to the side like Boulder Dash, so it's important to consider this when you plan your route. If you do lose one of your 3 lives, then you have to start again from scratch. Rock Crush is certainly a very difficult game, but it's also very rewarding when you get things right. I think the best way I can describe the rather rude sounding big flap attack is Phoenix with 10 times zoom. This might sound weird, but watch the gameplay on the screen and you'll soon see why. You start off here by choosing one of 10 difficulty levels, with the hardest being absolutely impossible. Then once you start, you'll see a huge vulture fly onto the screen with your blocky bloke standing on the bit below. The idea is to shoot this mahoosive bird right between the eyes to try and kill him, but this is a lot harder than it sounds because the bloody thing won't stop moving. so you have to time your shots just right and try to predict its movements too. Of course, this becomes a much harder thing to achieve on the higher levels where the bird moves a lot faster. If you miss the big flapper 5 times, he gets a bit pissed off with you and swoops down to devour you, finishing off with a massive belch. You are then shown your final score and get the chance to input your initials, something you don't see very often in a ZX81 game. Then you have to go again and try to beat the high score. Okay, so big flap attack is a very simple one, but it's also a rather striking one that's strangely addictive too. Another game that is inspired by something more famous, in this case Zaxxon, City of Zon is one of the most technically impressive ZX81 games I've ever seen too. Originating from America, this one certainly steals some of the most iconic elements of the Sega arcade classic, including the isometric viewpoint, the need to change your altitude to avoid getting destroyed, and the need to replenish your fuel too. However, it does add a load of new elements that are quite hard to get to grips with at first. You see, as well as your standard controls, you have a second set that activates different functions on your ship. These include 2 types of weapon, one more powerful than the other, that drains more fuel, the ability to switch armour on and off. When it's on, you use more fuel, but when it's off, the enemy throws everything at you, the ability to swap 300 points for some fuel, and lastly your grappling hook. This tool has 2 functions, firstly to pick up fuel canisters and secondly to capture the final boss, who you will only encounter when you earn 300,000 points with 2 hours of play. But don't worry, these are Zonish hours, which are much shorter than Earth hours. If you can get past those stupidly complicated controls, there is a lot to enjoy about City of Zon. Perseverance here is definitely required. Another title from ZX81 stalwarts, Romic, this one takes the form of a classic space shooter, somewhat like Space Invaders in many ways, but with plenty of rather original elements of its own. You start off by selecting the difficulty level, and then it's into the game itself, where you'll see a big ship in the bottom left and a steady stream of alien bugs flying in from the top right. Using your smaller scout craft, you must shoot down these enemies before they can drop their bombs on your mothership. Every time they drop a bomb, they take out a chunk of it, and if they break through to the engine, it explodes in spectacular fashion and it's game over. As well as shooting down the enemies and avoiding their fire, you'll also need to keep an eye on your fuel. If this runs low, you dock with the mothership to replenish it, However, if it runs out completely, the mothership will send out a refueling craft to get you back on track. However, this costs valuable time, where the bubble bugs can advance on their target. This little craft will also fly out to repair your ship if it gets destroyed, which costs you in the same way. Bubble Bugs is a really enjoyable arcade style affair for the wedge-shaped Sinclair. And we move from one space blaster to another, but this American title from Timex couldn't be more different, trying to emulate more advanced 3D games like Atari's Star Raiders rather than a simple single screen shooter like Space Invaders. I say Star Raiders, but Galactic Gunner is actually more like the game that preceded it, Starship, which was first released in arcades before becoming an Atari 2600 launch game. That's because this is a timed game. You have to try and amass as high a score as possible before the clock runs down or you run out of ammo. Your mission, apart from this, is pretty simple: to scour the galaxy for the enemy ships and take them out with your phasers. However, they'll do their very best to avoid your attacks, so you need to carefully anticipate their movements due to the small delay between you firing and your phasers shooting through space. The enemy will also try to hide their ships in huge clouds of galactic dust that your weapons cannot penetrate, so sometimes you'll have to wait it out, costing you valuable time. The graphics here are particularly impressive, with a fairly convincing first-person view and extra settings that will stop you getting bored. I already looked at Rocket Man earlier on in this video, and so I thought it was only right to end with the other famous high-res game from Software Farm, 49er, which is probably more well known and the better of the two games in my opinion too. Now the name of this title makes it sound like a minor 2049er ripoff, and indeed it has the same inspiration, with 49ers being the name given to miners during the American Gold Rush. However, this isn't a platformer and actually has more in common with Namco's Dig Dug. Your mission is simple: dig through the mine to collect all the gold and then head to the exit. However, actually doing this is harder than it sounds, as there are rats trying to bite you and an ugly gremlin who wants to inhabit your lair. But both can be stopped. You eliminate the rats by upsetting a snake's nest, at which point they slither out and eat all the rats. The gremlin is blocked from getting in the mine by a big pile of mud that he will eat away at. You can actually dump the dirt you dig to make this pile bigger, or just grab all the gold before he manages to break through, which is harder on later levels. This is such a slick game, perhaps the ZX81's very best, that will keep you coming back for more time after time.
Spent a fortune on a computer. Know what I found out? I hate computing.
Computing? I love it.
I hate it.
It's terrific.
Oh, she loves it. Computing?
Why spend a fortune to find out how you feel about computing when you can do it on a Timex Sinclair 1000 for $49.95? Who knows, you might love computing, or maybe not. The Timex Sinclair 1000.
I thought I'd hate it, but... Ta-da!
And that runs on my look at 10 amazing Sinclair ZX81 exclusives. But which of these great games were you most impressed with? Or do you have some suggestions of your own that I can cover in a follow-up video in the future? I always love to hear the thoughts and views of my audience, so please get typing in that comments section. Before I go though, I must thank all of my loyal patrons and YouTube members for continuing to support my channel and make videos like this possible. However, I must give special thanks to the following people in particular for their much appreciated pledges. D. Vaughan, Albert Davis, Richard Baker, Martin Wiggins, Peter Grantham, Bernard Santu, Mins, Classic Gamer 74, Josh Hartman, Dana Skronsky, Ben P. Stein, Tabby Kitsune, Grady Haynes, Paul Daniel, Seth A. Robinson, Calibatorn, Carl Olsen, Mark Strickland, Big Chuzzle, Cole Cloping, Black Siren, John Alberino, Krispy Kreme, Justin Cooney, Luke Boynton, Sarah B, Richard Tate, Telboy 2011, Tiago Silva, James Welch, Wesley K, Hunter Bungay, Cellphone Smartphone, Glacier 9 and Electron Star Collapse. If you also want to help support this channel, then you can now join as a member for as little as £2 a month, where you'll get access to exclusive videos and updates and much more besides. Just click the button on my community page to get started. My Patreon is also still available if you prefer to support me in other ways too. I've been the Laird, I thank you for watching and I'll see you all again for another video very soon.